Having been through times of questioning in my own personal life, what I find interesting often is how few people really ask questions. There were times I wish the phone would have rung. Times I wish people would just stop by and say, hey, can you straighten some things out in my mind? And it's amazing. It's an amazing phenomenon. People, I think they think, oh, he's being asked too much. And so we get asked not at all. And I'm giving some answer probably for Brother Les already. But we've looked forward to this time, and I appreciate Rick Arrowwood's willingness to put the schedule together with this in mind so that we could have some opportunity for Les to do what he always has done best, answer openly and transparently. Brother Les said, Brother Chuck, there are some questions I think we ought to ask even before we begin. So he's prepared 3 that we ought to examine together to modify the spirits of our heart. I think they'll be a blessing for us to consider in quietness and care, and then Dr. Les is going to come and answer some other questions that have been submitted. And those questions have been submitted, many of them online, where people do chatter. And then put in my direction, and I didn't have the wisdom to do as Les has said, I don't want to look at that. I've looked at some of that and honed it together with others who have submitted questions, and we'll submit some of those. But here are 3 that I think set a good temperature. Do you think that blogging has done much to damage the body of Christ? You don't have to answer it aloud, but it's worthy of thought. Do you think that the Spirit of God has been grieved and quenched by attitudes that have been dishonoring to God and disobedient to Scripture? And then a third question, do we need revival so that we can be the salt and the light that this decaying, dark world needs? I think on that we can all say amen. And we've been challenged to that even this morning. Dr. Les, we'll have you come, and I've drawn the short straw, so I'm going to be throwing questions at you, and you can lean on that pulpit if you want to. I told Brother Rick we ought to get 2 chairs up here and put a little fire behind us and have a fireside chat, but you always have a fireside chat spirit anyway, Dr. Les. So.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming today. I don't know what your motivation was for coming, and I know you have heard a lot. No one has been through more than I have been. And after 50 years in ministry, this is not how I expected to run my last mile. And so I appreciate the genuineness of the questions, and I hope you understand what it is to be loyal. None of you here who are in any pastoral role or leadership role would want a disloyal person under you. You would want them to believe your words. That's the route that I had chosen to take. And a lot of problems and a lot of confusion now seems to reign. And I think as we're going through these questions, I will try to answer them as honestly and graciously as possible. And so we don't know what necessarily is coming, but we do know that God knows our hearts in all of this, and we have tried to stay sensitive in obedience to the Spirit of God throughout our ministries. I know I'm flawed. I have always been opened. When we've experienced personal grief and failures, we've always submitted ourselves to the authorities who were there. I have always functioned under authority. I feel for those who never functioned under authority because they don't know what loyalty means. All they know is narcissistic self-serving. And you thank God. And much of that has caused confusion in your minds has been because I have been committed to be loyal. I always dance with who brung me. And when we used to have to let people go years ago at Northland, I'd say, people cuss me for free. I'm not going to pay wages and benefits for it. I'm getting cussed out there for free. And so I hope you will be understanding. I hope you understood these messages I've been given for 40 years. This is not a new thing. But there are new applications today.
Amen.
And sadly, the applications that we have to make now are very hurtful to me. But, okay.
Well, I'm just going to hasten to say, fellowship time's built in after, so more questions can be asked and more opportunities, and always, 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 the best procedures if you feel like, I didn't get a question answered. Rather than accusing a person for not answering a question, go to the person and ask your questions, and I think your heart will be resolved. So I apologize from the outset if you had a question that wasn't submitted and wasn't put into the raffle, so to speak, and you feel like my question wasn't answered. I know I speak for Dr. Odelwald when I say he would appreciate your phone call and would appreciate the opportunity to give any clarification of things that aren't clarified here. Dr. O, are you currently on staff at Northland?
No.
And can you tell us about your plans for the future then?
Well, we disconnected some months back, and we are starting building great leaders. We're starting a 501c3. We're just now getting close to getting our tax number. And we want to spend the rest of our days, we plan to do some writing on some of the leadership material. There's one book that Charlene and I are working on called 4 A's. What happens when normal is gone? Phone rings and normal is no more. And all of us hit the wall there. And the 4 A's that are there, some of the other leadership things. But we'll be going and try to do pastors' meetings. Our burden still is to uphold the hearts of people and strengthen the hands of pastors. That we've had that passion for years. We had it on the road. We had it before we went to Northland 30 years ago. We tried to exercise that at Northland. And so we're going to continue to do that, praying to network with pastors across the country who would be willing to have regional meetings and just get people to praying and giving tools to help local church bodies.
I've heard you say that at some point you felt like your heart just lifted from Northland. Maybe you could...
Yeah, it did. My heart lifted, place that I've never felt an ownership of any ministry that we've ever had. I always felt the stewardship. And I realized my stewardship had ended. I went as far as I could go. I stayed as loyal as I could stay till I realized I could not. And my heart lifted, and I'm not hurt. Hurt means it's about me. Disappointment means it's about the big picture. And I'm sad that the big picture is hurt, because we have 3,200 plus alumni out there plowing in the trenches, many, many unknown, unseen places. It's always been a blessing as I've traveled overseas, even within this last year, the numbers that we've networked with in that time. I felt when my stewardship ended, it hurt. It's not about me. It's about His cause. We move on to another stewardship. And my heart is gone from Northland.
If you don't mind me following up, this a little bit personal, but I did allude to phone calls and questions offered to you. Would you say that you're available to such, and have you had many phone calls in the last few months about, so what's going on, Dr. Les?
Well, you notice this right ear is flatter than the left ear. I have lived on the phone. One guy asked me, we went to breakfast, he said, people wondered, where are you in this? I said, people who love me call me, people who don't call you. I said, that's what our movement has become. Anybody who has emailed me, I've written a very honest response. We've turned from biblicism to pragmatism. And my heart had to lift out. And when PR experts came in, I felt had no theological moorings. I loved them. I attempted to talk. I attempted to approach. I always trusted Doc Olson's heart. I would talk with him, and I trusted his heart. He would vow, this is not what's happening. This is not where we're going. This is not what we're doing. And I attributed then to the PR experts who came in. I approached them one-on-one. I told one of them 2 years ago, you're going to close Northland down. We went out to eat, and I looked him right in the eye. I said, look me straight in the eyes. You're going to shut us down in 2 years. And this fall will be going into 2 years, because I said we can't take the reins out of God's hands and go to pragmatic philosophy. It can't happen. And here I had already had 28 years in there, and it's not, some of you out there look and say, well, why didn't he leave? Where is Lessinus if he hadn't any kids? Well, you leave pastor a church for 28 years. You pour your life into it for 28 years, and then let me blog about you. I'd like that chance one time if Charlene could ever teach me how to use that. You've got to understand. You bloggers make me sick. You've got to understand that. All of you experts, get a life.
Well, that
I know
pretty
this
much took
isn't
care
what
of
you
all
were
my
expecting.
questions, Dr.
Well,
Les. I mean,
Charlene, where's my medication? I say, Les is off his medication. Oh no, and so anyway, yes, my heart lifted. Yes, my heart is gone. Yes. Am I grieved? Am I praying for God to do so? Yes, absolutely. Though I heard from Dr. Olson, I do. I have no input, have not had for a long time, that had been received by these experts who were brought in. But it's easy for them to just go on down the road. And then we get left holding the bag. And I heard for Doc Olson. I really do. And because it was a dear friend. It's a man who I worked with and trusted. And I heard for him. I heard for him and his wife and family. And yet we move on. And we have to move on. I am not for CCM. I am not for CCM worship. I am not for the birds on a wire, I call them. We don't need that. And yet, is it sin? No. But is it wise? Not always. We have to look at the cultures that were there. And I'm a bushwhacker. You have to understand that. I don't understand a lot of this stuff. But I do know what grieves me and troubles me. And I do know, honestly, I need to address it for what it is. Is there sin in there's no sin in people being lined up singing, because we always have orchestras and fiddle players and all that. But where it goes back down to what motivates this. Because a lot of things are fine, but what is the motivation of that? So,
yeah, and some of the questions that, I'm in a bad place here, folks, because every question I had on here just got answered. It's great. That's a good place to be. People have asked Dr. O, and you really have answered it, but if you maybe could answer it on a specific, back a couple of years ago when the name was changed at Northland, you were asked to do a letter. Obviously, you've seen changes since then.
Yes, the letter, in some ways I feel I was used in that, but I was basing my input based on what I had been told, and I really did not have a problem with the name change in light of the multiplied graduates who go overseas. That made a lot of sense to me, and it did help our graduates a great deal who are in especially hard-to-access countries. I didn't, especially the way the TRACS accreditation group came with the recommendation, keep your overarching title of Northland Mission, Inc. Then you have Northland Baptist Bible College, Northland Grad Studies, Northland Global Outreach, and we had 4 functions under that. But a student still could be a graduate with Northland Baptist Bible College on his diploma. We didn't do away with Northland Baptist Bible College. We put the overarching title of Northland International. And at that time, I wrote a letter and I do feel now that I was used a little bit. I do think there was an agenda that I was not aware of that was broader than this one issue. I didn't have a problem with the change that took place in the dean's area, because the mentoring program was really good. The changing Wednesday, where I call them AA groups, but the mentoring groups that were on Wednesday. And that was a phenomenal discipleship program. I was really for that. I could see a lot of the changes that were good. Not all change is bad. What motivates the change is what you find out later. You know what I'm saying? In other words, why make a change now? But if I'm saying we're going to change here, but ultimately this is where we're going. Right. I had no issue with that at that time. The name change, some had thought we're not Baptist. I didn't see it that way because we still were Northland Baptist Bible College. We still had a faculty and staff that was committed to that. As the days kept going on, a greater discomfort came on the part of some of our Bible faculty and some of our staff that were wondering about some of the other things. But then you have to remember, I was on the road this past February. I flew 32,000 miles. So I was in Asia. I was in Puerto Rico. I was 3 trips to the West Coast when this Big Fat Eddie thing happened. And I didn't even know. So people said, you know what's going on? I said, no, that isn't true. Well, come here and look. So I get on the computer and look. I said, wow. So now all of a sudden I find out the floodgates have opened here. And I thought, this is not my heart. This is not my desire. And I have to remember, I'm out there at over half the time out there, staying in pastor's home the last 2 years. We stay in homes, and I'm up till 2 in the morning, have to get up and be sharp in the early service the next morning, and I'm answering questions for decisions I never made. And I didn't even know were being made at times. And being a simpleton, I told many of our staff, I said, I was fun to work with because I was easy to control. I'd never had a personal agenda that I was aware of. I honestly, when I surrendered, I didn't surrender to preach. I couldn't talk. My lisp was bad. My brogue was bad. My tongue-tied was bad. And I just simply laid myself out to be used of God. And I was very fun to work with because I was very easy to control. Because as a simpleton, I believed what I was told, according to 1 Corinthians 13. Love believes all things until I'm proven otherwise. And so when these things began to take place, I wrote the letter 2 years ago. I was told to write this, and I wrote it in support of what I knew. But unfortunately, I think there were things I did not know. I think there was a deeper agenda, and I'm giving my opinion now. I think there was a deeper agenda by these PR experts that were taking us where I would never have agreed to go. But that letter then that I had written out was in support, and the name change, I really did not have an issue with that. I did not have an issue with it, especially since we were going to keep our 4 functions. And that was the TRACS accreditation group. Of course, you know I've never been big on accreditation of any type. And I told Doc Olson, I said, I think God's plan is always better than the world's plan. But I said, if it's better for our graduates and if we're not having to compromise truth, many are comfortable with it. But we went with TRACS, and which was a lot harder approval than even regional at that time. And I said, if I wanted to make those decisions, I would have kept the title. 20 years of answering dumb questions, at that time I was trying to keep my wife alive. You remember when we transferred leadership, my wife, many of you prayed for her, and her descending aorta dissected, so I was spending a year working with her, staying with her. Miraculously, she's alive and well. But many of you remember that was back when we were making that transition. So I was out of pocket, but very supportive of the moves that were being made and changes that were being made. And so I didn't struggle. Some very, very badly struggled with Baptist not being in our overarching title. And I really didn't have an issue with that because I knew we were still Northland Baptist Bible College. And it did work greatly for those of our graduates who were out there in the U.S. It didn't matter. Overseas, it made a big difference because in many overseas colleges considered high school. And when university was in there, it made a... So that was not an issue with me. And I do think in retrospect, I was used. In other words, less is okay with everything, but I wasn't in charge of anything. I was there to help and lift hands. I have not been in an administration meeting probably for over 8 years.
We have a similar circumstance here. Pastor Taylor's here today, and Pastor Taylor and I have a dear friendship. He hasn't come to any of our pastoral staff meetings. he ever stopped in, I'd be scared. But not really, Pastor Taylor. We're fine.
Yeah,
But
no,
in a real way, when he goes out and is intern pastoring or carrying the torch in another church, fortunately or unfortunately, he's often given the responsibility of answering for me. So I think we kind of get that, and I appreciate
yeah,
that.
and I always wanted to be helpful and supportive. I really did. And even in this setting, I don't want to sound negative. I don't want to sound sour grapes. I have no intention to communicate any of that. But you have to understand, we went to there, I believe there were 89 students, 15 staff, I believe, and as God grew this to where we had a number, 150 plus in our grad programs and 850 students undergrad, there was no human explanation for that.
Amen.
There was no human explanation for that. And I said, we built by toughness and relationships. And people put up with the toughness because the relationships were strong, because we were pouring ourselves into that. And people say, so what if it gets cold? Look what we have. And there was a certain something about belonging to that.
Amen.
And it didn't make any human sense. It really didn't. Because we didn't grow by any of that means. And fortunately, we had Paul Patz, who had built the original foundation, which made it easy. And one of the big pressures Doc Olson had to take over was at the time when the attendance was beginning to wane. And waning attendance in Christian education today is a given.
That's right.
So all of us have to make adjustments. Our Christian schools are doing this for the most part. Bible colleges for the most part. And I think because of the junior colleges making more convenient, parents are making a convenience choice. Online, I heard Liberty now has over 100,000 online students. The fact that the income was lessening, and what Doc Olson stepped into, he was stepping into a waning income base, because when Paul Patch used to give to help with the support group, that $1 million a year, that was no longer coming in. So he had to deal with that. And I very much wanted to be a blessing and help with him to try to make the adjustments. He made some very firm decision cuts several years ago, and it hurt, but we did go through a grid. We went through a grid of, and each department turned in their grid and who would be least needed, and we made the layoffs, but we gave a full year on that. One never got over it. And so tried suing us and all how that goes. But I ached with him along that, because he was taking a job that I didn't have to face at that time. I did not face, there were always financial needs, but I didn't have to face what he faced when he came in and took that. Yeah. And he did a yeoman's job on that with the leadership. And cuts are never easy to make because you have such strong relationships. Yes. You know, if you've ever had to cut somebody here, everybody says, you can't let that person go. How can that happen? But yet you know as a leader it has to happen. Budget-wise, the money's not falling out of the air. And I think Doc Olson did a tremendous job in managing during that time. I think problems didn't come in Doc Olson's heart. I think when we started hiring PR experts who had no theological footing, and that might be an overstatement, and I know everything I'm saying today is weighed very cautiously. But I don't care. 40 years ago, Charlene and I put our reputations on the altar. We don't own one. Our only identity is who we are in Christ.
Amen.
We don't own a reputation. Yes. And our identity is Him. That's our accountability is to Him as well. But I have tried to be along that line. So I do think that all of you have known decline in your Christian schools. You've had to make cuts of long-term people. And so that had to be done. So the fact that the school started declining, but I think what happened in the decline, when some decisions were made that were an obvious change of philosophy, we went off the cliff. And that's what people couldn't understand. See, we were never right ditch and we were never left ditch. We tried to build a balanced middle, and many people were upset with me because they saw me as too weak on some areas. But I thought, if I can't be consistent, I'm not going to be dogmatic. On the left ditch was never an appeal. We were never appealed. We were too dead for that group. But a few filtered in, a few came in from the right ditch, but we built that solid middle. What these guys did, I think they equaled the right ditch with what our balanced middle was, and they started dumping on the balanced middle, and the balanced middle started bailing because they said, that isn't what Northland was. And I think where these guys, and I don't attribute that to Doc Olson, I attribute that to these guys who had no history, that were put in positions they never should have had. And consequently started dumping on this and made their focus the left ditch. That became the PR press. And I thought, are we nuts? You mean somebody's going to open a catalog and there's Moody and there's Liberty and there's Cedarville and there's this and better locations, better facilities, better spots, beaches. They get, Northland, that's what I want. 20 below zero average. Nearest Walmart, 25, that's exactly what I want. No.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, maybe I'm saying too much.
Well, I can give you the yes and no questions, Dr. Les. So are you a separatist today?
Yes.
Fundamentalist?
Yes.
That's what I kind of assumed. I just wanted to ask, I don't know if others were assuming the same things, but we wanted to be on the same wavelength. Some people try to tie together things historically, and that's appropriate on occasion. We want to go back and learn from history as we know or will repeat it. Talk to us a little bit about meeting with John MacArthur. That's been kind of out there. So Les went and met with John MacArthur. Was that the turning point?
Yeah, I've even heard some went to the Hiles pastor school.
Really?
Have you heard that?
No, I haven't heard it. I missed it. Yeah.
Oh, you haven't heard that?
No, I missed that.
Oh.
Yeah. No, I think I have heard that.
Where another gospel versus,
Yeah.
Yes, we did go. I agreed to go. Biblically, you have questions. Everybody is expert on John MacArthur.
I'm not an expert on John MacArthur, but little searching tells you where he's at. I think he's a good Bible teacher in many, many ways. But he is with Together for the Gospel group. He's spoken there. He has a lot to do with them. And you don't have to do much searching to know that if you identify with that crowd, you're headed in a different direction than what I would have thought that Northland supposedly was to be. But anyway, that's my opinion. I wouldn't have gone that direction, but Dr. O has different thoughts on that. So let's listen.
We went, he gave us a day. We heard about the horrible music. His morning service made Bob Jones' Sunday morning service look liberal. Sunday night had an orchestra playing music beforehand. I don't know what goes on. Somebody said it's bad. But the meeting we had with Dr. MacArthur, extremely gracious, and he answered questions. He said, I have never been. He said, Graham has been in our city 3 times. We don't believe it's biblical evangelism. We are not along that line. Our issue was not the position. Our issue became what is the disposition on some of these things that came in. And we had I have no apologies for going to meet with MacArthur, especially when people will agree to go and preach or and meet with another gospel group.
I just read MacArthur's biography. It was fascinating to realize, in the history of the English preaching world, he'll probably die as the most prolific author. He's probably going to exceed Spurgeon. It's just an amazing thing. And so just some knowledge base.
But he said this, he said, I think I'm more separated than you are. He said, my separation is where God draws the lines. And he said, there are questions where and I think he said some things that I don't feel at liberty to say. But Dr. McLaughlin, myself, were very comfortable with his answers, and then Matt had one of his, he's not there anymore, one of his assistants come and answer questions to our Bible faculty. Had him come. Then somebody said I had invited him to, I was not in chapel. I didn't invite him. I wasn't there in chapel even that day. I did not introduce him because I wasn't even in chapel that day. But he met with the Bible faculty that afternoon. I forget his name, but he's pastoring in Iowa or Kansas or somewhere now, Missouri maybe. But I felt it was a very good meeting. Biblically, you go face to face. Ask the questions you want to ask. Get the questions you want answered. I do believe, well, somebody said, well, his church polity. I think we probably need to talk to Dr. Minnick down there, and because I think his polity is similar.
Right.
I looked, I couldn't see. The church is in a bad area. There's no circus going on. There's no pragmatism to make it grow. Preaches the word. To me, a solid theologian. Some positions that he has, would they be my positions? But the thing is, when I don't look at the position so much as the function. Okay, that night I was in the evening service. 100 people of their congregation were being sent to the mission field. They were putting a hand on 100 of their people to the mission field. The baptismal waters are stirred constantly, and they give a clear testimony of salvation before they're baptized. So if you say, well, he's pretty Calvinist. I remember one time I was doing, in fact, my brother Earl's son's wedding. A guy came and said, Northland's Calvinist. I said, are you talking functional or theological? And he said, what do you mean? I said, how many have you led to Christ this year? Well, none. I said, so you're a functioning hyper-Calvinist? I said, so what are you asking me? I said, give me a Calvinist who's winning souls constantly rather than an Arminian who never does. So that ended that discussion. I'm not sure how much sense that makes. You see what I'm saying on here? I don't see that us meeting with MacArthur was a step of disobedience like it would be for me to go and cooperate with somebody who's preaching another gospel. I don't like a non-repentant gospel message. But yet we justify that.
Yeah.
That we can do that. We can do that because there are...
And I think on balance, I can remember a time, because I used to go to Northland regularly and speak there, but I can remember a time when you went through on campus a bit of a Calvinistic brouhaha, and as I recall, you came down on a pretty good stand.
Well, it was public in chapel. Those of you who were there when it happened, I was getting... In fact, I said, if I write a book, God is so sovereign, I have to be deceitful about it. And I kept getting feedback that statements were being made, this was being taught in class, no, this is not what's happening. So we dealt with it publicly. I said, visitors, I'm sorry. We're dealing with a family matter. And I had heads bowed and eyes closed. And with some that I met with personally, I said, I don't believe in limited sovereignty. He said, what do you mean by that? I said, God's sovereign enough to quicken me from the dead, and I was dead in trespasses and sin, sovereign enough to quicken me to be aware of my need, but he's not sovereign enough to convince me to be a hyper-Calvinist, so that's your goal, because God can't pull it off. I said, I don't believe in limited sovereignty. I bet you that makes a lot of sense too, doesn't it? Yeah, he addressed, to me, function according to... I don't want any philosophy that causes me not to enjoy the whole Bible.
Amen.
I don't want any philosophy that makes me tighten up when I read Ephesians 1. I don't want any philosophy that makes me tighten up when I read whosoever will may come. I want to enjoy it all because God is both.
Amen.
And if God doesn't know who is going to be saved, he isn't God. And I'm not running for God. I have had a hard enough time working at Northland.
Amen.
As you can see, it's a mess now. So God would never have made that kind of a mess out of it. And yeah, you're always dealing with. And the experts out there who know everything have never had to deal with these things and have your stomach in a knot for days and weeks and months on end because you never do anything right. I've talked to college presidents who have taken positions. I said, I hope you know what you're getting into. Because if you go from a pastor to a Bible college president position, you go from being loved to not being able to do anything right. And that includes students who look at you, sophomores who know everything. Soon as you turn to Old Testament text, they close their Bibles. He's not biblical. And it makes you mad enough to mug an Avon lady, and yet you have to keep focused and plowing.
Amen.
And we had this, I call it my too stupid to quit party back in March. 50 years in ministry, I call it too stupid to quit. And so, you know, would I have done some things differently? Absolutely. I probably, in retrospect, would have left when I left the presidency, in retrospect. But I wanted to be a help. I wanted to focus. But it is what it is.
Amen.
And so I have to trust God's sovereignty. You know, like the Presbyterian said, thank the Lord that's over with, when he fell down the steps. And so we have to trust God's sovereignty in that time. My heart aches, not hurt. My heart aches. I ache for people involved. I get aggravated with, I think, people who thought, I don't know if any of you ever watched Alf. Remember Alf, the alien? And I think some people looked at me like I was with Alf when he came from Melmac and crashed. And Alf hid in Willie's house, and I went to Northland. And I think some people look at me like that, like, you know, not Mars Melmac. And some of you who...
That's too deep for me. I didn't follow all that, Dr.
Yeah, well, you have to get past Revelation to figure all that out. That's way back there in the index. So,
Brother Rick, you want to come and close us in prayer? And I trust we've honored the Lord. Thank you, Dr. Les. We're not surprised, because we love you and we've been fed God's word from you. You've stood as an example, and we appreciate your candor. I know these are not easy things to share, and yet we appreciate that your heart is for the Lord, and we'll be praying for you and for Charlene, and I want you to know you're in the midst of friends. And I think we didn't give a whole lot of cautions here other than say, you want to let a man's word stand for what a man's word is, and don't take your own interpretations and spin them. And there are those out there who that's their ministry. And as you've already said, we're going to stand before the Bema seat.
yeah, right.
So we thank the Lord for you.
And I thank you for your patience.
Amen.